Hi guys and welcome to Studio Wildlife. In today's video I'm going to share with you my top 10 tips for acrylic painting, especially if you are a beginner artist or trying to push from being a beginner into a professional artist trying to sell your work. So acrylic paints are fantastic paints for beginners to use because they dry quickly, they don't make too much of a mess, and you can actually get pretty decent quality paints without breaking the bank. So those of you on a budget, those of you not ready to buy the most expensive paints, you can actually get decent quality acrylic paints for very cheap. Tip number 1, choose the right canvas. Don't just go into an art store and just purchase the first canvas that you see. Look for canvases that are square. So that doesn't mean square in shape, that means that all the edges are at right angles to each other. Look for canvases that don't have any dents or marks. Like, there's so many times where I was just starting out with my art career, I would just go and buy a cheap canvas from a hobby shop. I wouldn't even bother to look to see if those canvases were straight or if they were wonky or if some of the wood was warped. When it came to framing those artworks, it was a real faff. It was a real difficulty framing them because they weren't straight and they didn't match up to the frame. So my tip number 1 is choose your canvas carefully. One quick tip with this is you can get your canvas and you can walk up to a wall or the corner of a wall and you can press your canvas against the wall. If parts of the canvas come away from the wall, then you know it isn't square. If it fits in the right angle corner, then you know it's perfect. If not, choose a different canvas. Tip number 2 is prime your canvas with an acrylic gesso. Don't start a painting on a pure white ungessoed canvas. One, it can be a little bit intimidating, but also the gesso helps to protect the canvas. It can stop paint soaking through the canvas, especially if it's a cheap canvas, which can preserve that painting for many years to come. Do prime your canvases, even if it's already primed one from a shop, prime it with a gesso or an acrylic primer. I have a great one from Winsor & Newton. I'll show you that. In fact, one second. This is the acrylic primer that I use the most in my work. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see if it will focus. There we go, white gesso primer from Winsor & Newton. Tip number 3 is use a variety of brushes. Don't start a painting with just one brush. You can get a collection of brushes really cheap and really easily. A wider variety of brushes does make your painting look a lot more interesting. This is just a pack of brushes. These are Royal & Langnickel brushes that I just picked up from a hobby store today for about £10. If I'm just starting out with my acrylic painting, there are probably 3 brushes that I would use, and I will show you which 3 that I would always recommend you having in your collection. A 1-inch flat brush, so a large flat brush, a medium filbert brush, a small round brush. These 3 brushes are perfect for beginners to use in their artwork. I hate seeing new artists just use one single brush because no matter how good the painting is, it makes the painting look boring. Whereas if you've got a variety of brush strokes, a variety of brush sizes, it just makes that painting look that little bit more interesting. It holds the viewer's gaze for a lot longer and it's more likely to sell. So that brings us up onto tip number 4, which is the paints that you use. Don't go into an art store and buy the cheapest paints that you can find. More often than not, they will make your painting look worse than if you'd spent a little bit more. Cheap paints don't really look very good on the canvas. They don't have much pigment, and when you actually paint them, it takes lots and lots of layers for them to build up enough colour. More expensive paints can cover the canvas and just make your painting look that little bit more professional. I use Winsor & Newton Abstracts Senolia, and I use Daler-Rowney paints, just the student quality ones. They're relatively cheap, but they're much better than the very basic quality that you can get. Tip number 5, keeping your paints wet. This is something that I get asked all the time. How do I keep my acrylic paints wet for longer? There are a few different ways to do this. One is just use more paints. If you put more paint on the palette, it will stay wet for longer. Starting out myself, I used to just put tiny little blobs of paint on the palette. I kept on having to put more paint on my palette and the paint constantly kept drying. To fix this, there are different things that you can do. So use more paints for one. You can also keep a little spray bottle filled with water and just spray your palette every now and then. There are also these things called stay wet palette, and the other option is slightly more expensive, but it's the use of a flow enhancer or a medium that keep them wet for longer, keep them a bit runnier, and they allow them to be used more as glazes rather than just solid blocks of colour. A little tip here, if you want to leave your paints overnight or you want to leave them for a few hours while you have a break from painting, cover your palette with some cling film after spraying a little bit of water onto it. Then you can keep those paints wet for hours, sometimes even days. And that's one of the things that I do if I want to keep my acrylic paints wet for more than one painting session. Tip number 6, don't use too much water. I see a lot of beginners using a lot of water when they're mixing acrylic paints, and what this tends to do, it doesn't allow the paint to adhere to the canvas or stick to that canvas. Bubbles of paint forming because there's too much water and not enough paint on your actual brush. To fix that, just use small quantities of water. Dip the very tip of your paintbrush into your water pot rather than dipping in the whole brush. Add water gradually rather than adding lots of water and then adding bits of paint. A second tip with the water is make sure you have 2 water pots available. One for washing your brushes and one for using as a medium to mix with your paints to make them more fluid. Another bonus tip for you here is when you're cleaning your brushes. Here I have a brush, let me hold it here so you can see. So I've got a brush and I've got my water pot. So what I tend to do when I'm cleaning my brushes is dip my brush in the water, give it a scrape, and then just wipe it on a paper towel. What I see lots of, especially with beginners, is people putting their brushes in their water pots and leaving them like this. If you leave them like this, you can see how the tip of the brush bends slightly in that water pot because of gravity. This will actually result in the bristles of the brush being damaged. What you want to do is rinse it off and then take it out of the water. You don't want to be resting your brush tip downwards because that's going to damage the end of the fibres and it's going to ruin the brush. If you need to store it into a pot, take your brush and put it in your pot, handle end down. That will protect the bristles and keep your brush in shape for much, much longer. My next tip is for when you're actually painting. Paint with acrylics in layers. Don't try to do it, especially as a beginner, all in one go. The paint isn't as pigmented as oil paints. It does take a few layers to completely cover the canvas and make sure that there's none of that bare canvas showing through. Make sure you work in layers, build up your colours, build up your shadows and build up your tones. The good thing about acrylics versus oils is that you can build those layers up in the same session. So it's much quicker than working with oils, because with oils you have to wait for each layer to dry before you can progress onto the next one. Tip number 8. Don't use colours straight out of the tube. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see beginners make. The colours that you can buy from a shop are very, very basic colours. They are not the colours that you need for every painting. So you need to mix your own. One of the biggest improvements that you can make and one of the best steps to becoming a professional artist is learning how to properly mix colours and apply them to your canvas in the correct place. Using colours straight out of the tube and mixing your colours right at the beginning of a painting can sometimes give your artwork a paint by numbers feel. To remove that, you want to mix your colours as you progress through the painting. So you're viewing what you want to do and you're making judgments about the paint that you've already got down versus the paint that you want to add. Rather than mixing all of those colours right at the beginning, it's much better to mix the colours as you go. It just allows you to understand the relationships between the colours that you are putting onto that canvas much better, and it results in a better painting. Tip number 9. Paint what you see, not what you think you see. When I see beginner painters and they're painting a mug or painting a cat or painting a dog or painting a person, they paint what they think they see. We've all seen mugs, we've all seen cats, we've all seen dogs. We think we know what they look like. But your pre-perception of what that animal or what that object can look like can alter the way that you paint. It's much, much better to paint what you see by breaking those objects up into simple shapes. Then it's much easier to get an accurate and in proportion image. I'll show you what I mean by that now. For this one, I'm just painting a tiger from my memory. I'm looking at what I think a tiger looks like, starting with the eyes, putting the nose in, and just sort of sketching out what I think it would look like. This isn't a very accurate or precise method, and doing things from memory like this are good, but not if you want something that looks realistic. For the next one, I'm going to break it up into the shapes a little bit more. So I'm starting with the nose and thinking about that big rectangular shape, and then the sort of triangle shapes that form the bottom of the eyes and the whiter areas around the tiger. I would like to say that I am using a reference photo for this picture, and I'm focusing on those bigger shapes first rather than trying to draw in all of the details. And I'm studying that reference photo closely, trying to pick out those big, obvious shapes. We can refine them down into smaller, more detailed shapes later on in the painting. You can see here when I'm just using the white paint just to show you where those big shapes are. So if you look for these big shapes in your photos, it makes it much easier to create this realistic looking and in proportion piece rather than just trying to imagine or even think about your preconceived misconceptions about what those animals or those objects look like. So make sure to study that reference photo closely, make sure to look at those shapes and see how you can transfer those shapes to your canvas. If you do that properly, focusing on those simple shapes, you will get an accurate and in proportion final image. And then we have tip number 10, and that is to clean up properly. This is a huge thing that amateur artists do not do. They do not take care of their equipment properly. Make sure you take care of your brushes. Don't just wash the end of your brush, make sure you also wash the parts of your brush that join with the handle. By cleaning both bits, you're going to take care of those brushes and they're going to last much longer. Make sure you empty your water pot out because you don't want an old water pot leaving out. Trust me, it ends up smelling after a few days. Make sure you clear that out straight away. Make sure you wipe off your palette and clean your palette. You don't want dry paint on there because that will take much longer to clean in a few days' time. So I just use an old glass scraper and a glass palette just to scrape away the paint after I've used it. You can also give the palette a little spritz with some water and that helps to remove that acrylic paint much more easily. One final tip with brushes is you can actually try to reshape old brushes by just using something as simple as hand soap. You can actually scrape your brush along the hand soap, pick up some of that soap onto the brush and use it to reform the brush into its original shape. After you've done this, you want to make sure to leave your brushes to dry for a few days before you reuse them. You don't want to be adding soap into your painting. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed it and I hope you found these 10 tips really useful and helpful in your artwork. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It means so much to myself and Amber, and as always, head on over to studiowildlife.com for more wildlife art tips.